Imagine this. You're asked to write the very soul of a new nation. Not just a rule book, but something that can bring together hundreds of millions of people who speak different languages, follow different faiths, and are just stepping out from under centuries of colonial rule. Well, that's exactly what this story is about. How India's constitution was forged in fire, a true testament to a nation's will to write its own destiny against all odds.
Let's set the scene. The year is 1947. India is finally free, but that freedom comes at a brutal, terrible price. The subcontinent is literally carved in two, which unleashes this massive wave of violence and displacement that leaves scars for generations. We're talking millions forced to flee their homes, and the memory of those horrific killings was seared into the mind of pretty much everyone. This wasn't a peaceful beginning. It was a turbulent, chaotic backdrop against which a brand new future had to be written.
And as if partition wasn't a big enough challenge, there was this other monumental problem. See, the British didn't rule all of India directly. About a third of the land was made up of 565 princely states, each with its own ruler. Now, with the British gone, these states were technically free to do whatever they wanted: join India, join Pakistan, or just become independent. India could have shattered into hundreds of tiny pieces. So the task wasn't just to write a rule book, it was to somehow build a single unified country out of all these fragments. So it's in this stormy dawn of freedom, right in the middle of all the chaos from partition and the huge challenge of unification, that a group of really remarkable individuals came together. They were given this immense responsibility of figuring out what this new India was actually going to be. And look, this was a marathon, not a sprint. The group in charge, the Constituent Assembly, actually had its first meeting before independence, back in December 1946. They worked right through the fire of partition, finally adopting the final draft in November 1949. And then the document officially came to life on January 26, 1950. That's the day India truly became a republic. So the body responsible for this epic task was called the Constituent Assembly. But who were these people? I mean, were they really a good representation of India's mind-boggling diversity? Let's take a closer look. Okay, so at first glance, this chart seems to tell a pretty simple story. A whopping 82% of the members in the assembly belong to the Congress Party. So you have to ask, right? Was the Indian Constitution just the vision of a single party? Was this whole thing just a Congress document? Well, the reality was way more complex than that. The Congress Party back then wasn't monolithic, not like we think of parties today. It was more of an umbrella organization. Think about it. Inside this one party, you had socialists arguing with landlords, you had big industrialists debating with labor activists, and you had devout traditionalists in deep discussions with staunch secularists. This incredible diversity within the party itself meant that the assembly was an absolute hotbed of debate and different ideas. And of course, steering all these intense debates was a core group of incredible leaders. You had Jawaharlal Nehru, who really set out the vision with what was called the objective resolution. Then there was Sardar Patel, a master pragmatist who was working behind the scenes, building bridges and finding common ground. Rajendra Prasad was the president of the assembly, making sure every voice got heard. And then you had Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. He was the chairman of the drafting committee, the man with the massive job of taking all these fiery debates and turning them into the actual legal architecture of the Constitution. And this is where the real drama unfolds. Because forging a constitution means you have to have some of the most difficult, most passionate arguments a country can possibly have. These weren't just dry legal discussions. They were really debates about the very soul of India. One of the most explosive topics was about something called separate electorates. This was basically a system where minorities would only vote for candidates from their own community. Some people, like B. Pakar Bahadur, argued it was absolutely essential to protect their identity. But for leaders like Sardar Patel, who had just seen the absolute horror of partition, this was a complete non-starter. He famously called it a poison that had divided the nation and led directly to all that bloodshed. The trauma of 1947 was so fresh that the consensus moved really firmly against any system that would politically divide citizens by religion. But you know what's interesting? The debate quickly showed that the word minority wasn't just about religion. N.G. Ranga, a socialist leader, stood up and argued that the real minorities were the poor and the landless. He said for them, legal rights don't mean a thing without economic justice. And of course, Dr. Ambedkar was there championing the cause of the depressed classes who had been socially crushed for centuries. And then Jaipal Singh gave this incredibly powerful voice to the Adivasis, the tribal communities. Just listen to this statement from Jaipal Singh. He reminded the assembly that Adivasis were the original people of the country, yet they had been exploited and neglected for thousands of years. His demand wasn't just for protection, it was for a real share in the new nation, for things like reservations in government and education to try and correct a massive historic injustice. All right, the next big fight was about power. I mean, where should it actually be held? Should there be a strong central government in Delhi calling the shots, or should the states have more autonomy? Leaders like Nehru and Ambedkar, who were just haunted by the chaos of partition, argued for a strong center to hold the country together. But others, like Kesanthanam from Madras, gave a stark warning. He said if you concentrate all the power in one place, the center will eventually break under its own weight. And wow, if you thought those debates were intense, maybe the most emotional one of all was over language. What was going to be the national language of India? The push to make it Hindi was incredibly fierce. One member, R.V. Dulekar, even said that anyone who didn't know Hindustani had no right to even be in the assembly. Whoa. That created an immediate backlash, especially from the South. G. Durgabai warned of bitter controversy, explaining that for people who didn't speak Hindi, this felt less like national unity and a lot more like cultural domination. So with all these fierce, passionate disagreements on religion, power, and language, you have to be wondering, how did they ever manage to create a single constitution? Well, it's because beneath all that conflict, there were some truly revolutionary ideas that almost everyone could get behind. They pulled it off by building on a foundation of 3 game-changing ideas. First, universal adult suffrage. Now think about this. At a time when many Western countries still had voting restrictions, India declared that every single adult, man, woman, rich, poor, would get 1 vote. That was a radical act of faith in its people. Second, a secular state. The nation would have no official religion, guaranteeing freedom of belief for everyone. And third, despite all the debates, they did ultimately agree on a strong federal center, believing it was the only way to hold India's fragile unity together. And the really crucial thing to get is that none of this was rushed. We're talking 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days. Every single clause, every right, every power was argued over, discussed, and debated again and again. This was a document born from painstaking argument and consensus building. So what does all this history mean for us now? Well, this isn't just something to read about in a textbook. The document they created is a living, breathing legacy. And believe me, the debates they had back then continue to echo in India today. So in the end, the framers gave us a framework, one built on compromise and a really radical faith in the Indian people. They rejected division, they expanded what it means to be a minority, and they balanced power to hold a fragile new nation together. But they didn't give us all the answers. And you know what? That might be their greatest legacy. The Constitution isn't just some historical document sitting in a museum. It's an ongoing debate. The very questions they argued over, power, rights, identity, are the same ones that define India today, reminding us that forging a nation is a job that never, ever truly ends.